is the top of the hour of some time zone. It could be 12, it could be 2, who knows? So I can tell one thing, don't try to undock your attendee list, because as near as I can tell, it's impossible to dock it back in the GoToMeeting unless someone knows the magic way. But I've got a floating attendee list now, all up in my screen.
What if you leave and come back if it's in your way? I know sometimes they get in your way.
It is in my way, and you know, I put it onto a different monitor or onto a different thingy, and it pops back here. Do you guys see it?
No.
Okay, well, I'll just ignore it. It's fine. Let's see. Okay, well, so this is a follow-up on what Stephen was talking about this morning with regards to the pandemic impacts and how it's going to affect our life in Jackalope, you know, best practices. You know, it sounds like there's, you know, I think we're getting a little bit of clarity, but you know, there's still a little bit of confusion, I believe, with regards to what to do, and I'm certainly confused as well. I mean, there's a couple things, or maybe one thing that's clear to me. By the way, I stole your presentation format, Susie, so I didn't realize there's animations. I mean, I'm guessing that unless at the end of the year, I mean, your traffic volumes are going to be pretty strange at the end of 2020 if you do not use current year factors to adjust 2020. I mean, I think that's a true statement. You know, it's, you know, factors aren't absolute numbers, you know, I mean, you know, you're saying it's higher in July than in April or something like that, but the pandemic hit, you know, affected traffic more in the earlier part of the year, and it's just going to seriously mess things up. So I'm hearing what Stephen says about cherry picking your methodology for factoring, that it's not really fair to, you know, use, you know, to use one method during, you know, one sort of traffic trend, and then use a different method during another sort of traffic trend, and maybe artificially increase your total ADTs. I get that. But on the other hand, if you don't do that this year, at the end of the year, you're going to have some pretty unrealistic numbers, I think. And that's a question, it's not a statement, but I think that's true. Do people agree with that? Do you have a comment on that, Stephen? Let's see.
Yeah, I don't know any fair way of actually addressing how when some state has a multi-year factoring process and avoiding. They ought to probably just use a multi-state factor or a multi-year factor, just continue doing it the same way.
Well, it depends on what factor we're talking about. So if we're talking about like seasonal factor, that's, you know, looking at seasonal variations. You know, that's one thing, and then, but if we're talking about growth factor, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
You know, you know, if you don't use the current year growth factor, current year's data for computing growth factors or negative growth factors, probably, I mean, you're going to have a final ADT tally of, you know, something that's relatively reasonable, you know, so you might even have an increase in traffic if you're using prior year data to compute current year growth factors, if you know what I'm saying. I mean, and would that be acceptable? Even though it's not fair, would it be acceptable?
No, it is expected that the state uses this year's permanent counters to make current year for the data that they have. So for a given segment, you need to. So I guess one would say probably suspending a multi-year factoring process and going to a one-year factoring process is what they should do if they didn't do any counting or did a very limited number of counting and didn't have the current cycle with them being able to annualize it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the state, but a lot of states, will have like a 3-year obsolescence kind of schedule. Well, maybe they'll do a third of their network every year.
Right.
But 2/3 of the network are going to be vulnerable to the growth factor.
Well, even no, actually, the whole system would. I know that no states are not doing anything other than Oregon is not doing any counts. But let's just assume that you've done very few. So let's say you only did 10% of what you normally would do. So 90% of your counts for 2020 were not done. Okay, or or whatever the percentage is that you happen to have. So let's take that for example. Okay, so for those 10% accounts that you actually did, you'd want to annualize those, and you'd want to annualize those with the data from 2020 for sure. You would not want to annualize it with other years' factors, either prior year or prior 2 years or whatever you happen to use. You'd want to use this year's factors for sure. Number one, for those for whatever percentages that you counted. For the other counts that are prior year, 2018, 2019, that you would have factored up to this year or factored to this year using your change rate factors, you would want to use from 18 to 19, the change rate for those, and from 19 to 20, you determine change rates based upon your permanent sites. So for many of the sites, for 19 to 20, to bring it to current year, you would apply a negative rate to those. So your actual traffic would go down for the data from 2018. For the data for 2019, you'd have to apply your 1-year change rate, and whatever the rates were for 19 to 20, you would use those, and that likely would be down also.
Right.
Because the annualized traffic data for each one of the segments would be down for the year. So it makes sense that all of your traffic for all of your segments would be down for the year. Yeah.
Right.
Now,
there's a comment in the chat, Joe.
So it makes sense to not do a multi-year and just for this year or next year, you would use just this year's pandemic values for how to do a change rate from 19 to 20. And also coming out of it from 20 to 21, you'd want to use the 1-year change rate.
I think that's the conclusion I was coming to too. I mean, despite what you did in the past, even though it may not be fair, whatever, I don't see any other way to do it. Otherwise, it's going to look really strange.
Right. Yes, that's. I think that's correct. Yes. What you just what we just talked about.
Yeah. Okay. So Sean from Kentucky says the way we're viewing it, this is life, which I agree with. Much like the economic crisis of 2008 and how incredible fuel prices killed truck percentages and travel as a whole, this pandemic too is life, and the numbers will reflect it in the future. Yep. If we omit this year in the part as a whole, we're basically doing is skewing the data. I agree with that, Sean. But we want the data to accurately reflect reality. And I think to do that, even for those people that are using multi-year averages, factor averages, they will have to, at least temporarily, like Stephen says, go to a 1-year. We're just using current year data for our factors.
And that influence, depending on how long the COVID exists in some states, could be even 2 years, meaning that for 2020, we have to do it. And then for 2021, we also have to do it. Because unless you're doing your whole state's counting in 2021, most states don't count their whole state system in 1 year. You're going to have data that is down in 2020 that you want to then have be raised in 2021 as you come out of it, right? So there's a come in and go out process.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's kind of like we're in normal mode where we had variations in years, and it was not a bad idea to necessarily average multiple years together to come up with your factors, because that smooth things out, and but we're not in normal mode anymore. So having, it sounds like pretty much everybody should switch to a 1-year factor paradigm and to run phase 3 basically at the end of the year, so that the current year factors that you create at the end of the year are then applied to the prior year's data, as opposed to relying on the year before's factors estimate.
I believe the only state that is doing multi-year averaging for creating factors is Iowa. Anyone in the meeting that is doing multi-years to create factors can notify us of that, but my experience has been it's only Iowa that does the 3-year average.
Yeah,
And so there's two things. There's that.
Minnesota
There's that.
had been doing that,
Mhm.
but we aren't anymore after moving to Jackalope.
Okay.
We had been using an average across years.
yeah,
So there's two. There's.
oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Stephen.
Yeah, so most states did, yeah. For years and years and years, people use multi-year averaging, and then in the middle 2007 and 8 or so, people moved away from doing that, and I was not aware of anybody who was doing multiple years anymore. So that's good to know that most of your customers are not using multiple year. I think that's the best. Personally, I think that's the best way of doing it, is not using multiple years, because the dynamics of significant snowfall, right, in the wintertime, or I don't know, an extra long early spring, all these things that happen that are weather related, and we need to dynamically have those part of our factors for that current year.
Yeah. So there's two issues. There's the multi-year issue, but then probably the one that will affect us more is many people just use the prior year factors to adjust current year counts, and then don't run phase 3. That probably, we probably have 5 or 6 clients that fit into that framework. And I think for them, I think the suggestion would be that, you pretty much have to run phase 3. And
I don't think we have any clients anymore that don't run phase 3. Prior to now, it was the last one remaining that didn't, I believe, again, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, was New Jersey. So that wouldn't be anything we would be dealing with in this.
Minnesota wasn't running phase 3, but
Okay.
we plan this year to hold loading all of our short duration counts until the 2020 continuous data is finalized and the factors are created.
Okay, and then
So
just
we're not
run them
gonna
all.
just run them all in like February. It's gonna be a busy winter.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Idaho's the same boat. We're planning on running all of our factors in the January timeframe. We're going to go ahead and load up and process all of our short-term counts, but then we'll just do a rerun at the end of the year.
And you're doing that because we do have a mechanism for dealing with it. That's exactly what phase 3 is for. It's for recomputing those count ADTs based on the factors that you just created.
Exactly. One of the things that we did was we marked off all of our counts this year because we didn't know what the guidance was going to be. So we marked them as no ADT, I believe. And so we'll have to go through and we want to leave the notes because we put notes in with all of them. But we'll have to unmark that when we run phase 3.
Okay, so maybe there's not a huge change then for most people in order to get decent statistics. And then, and then for future years, we're just talking about maybe staying on a 1 year, which will be natural based on what people do, and just running phase 3 until we're out of this kind of variability area. Or maybe just everybody always runs phase 3 forever. So it sounds like we're good. Does anybody have any more comments on that?
Joe, with the MEC And phase 3, is that relationship only set up the way it is in Minnesota, or would any other states have to run phase 3 on counts loaded through the manual entry of counts?
Other
It's an
people
option.
definitely use Mac. Kansas uses it almost exclusively. They will have to run phase 3 for Mac stuff.
So is the phase 3 set up to omit MEC loaded counts just for Minnesota?
It's an option. It's a setting. It's a yes/no setting to include MEC or not. I was going to demonstrate that when we cover annual next.
Perfect.
But I would think you'd want to, for this year, have that setting be yes, but I don't know. Okay. Well, that's all I had then. We were just talking about how this would affect us, and it sounds like it's not going to affect us too much. It sounds like it fits into what people were already doing for the most part.
Joe, you had mentioned yesterday, maybe we would talk today about how the pandemic might impact scheduler and pushing counts to be recounted for next year or not, so I don't know if you wanted to talk about that or what the thoughts were in your mind.
Yeah, that is a good point. We talked about scheduler yesterday, and if something's not counted, depending on how the cycles and groups are set up, it might automatically get pushed onto next year or not. But based on people's current year count season, I mean, do you think that's going to be adequate, or do you think we need to do something more than that? Are you just going to be overwhelmed with counts next year if that's what you have built in? Or do you think we need to make any changes? I guess that's the question. Later, Stephen. Stephen's leaving for an hour.
Joe, is the process simple enough to maybe go through and mark all of the groups to have counts not carry over, create your schedule for 2021, then even maybe you change your mind, you check mark the box again, you recreate your schedule. Is it as simple as check marking, uncheck marking, and then hitting the recreate schedule button to add or remove sort of recounts? So my question is it as simple as that?
For most people, it would be. I think Minnesota is the only place where the schedule's recreated every time you open the schedule info box. I think for everybody else, they do have a button, but yes, I mean, they would have to remember every time to go and uncheck that and check it back if anybody ever wanted to recreate the schedule. But yeah, that is true. You can change the metadata however you want, then press the create schedule, and then change it back for normal mode. You just have to be careful to do that. Mm-hmm. Either do it for the current year and then just remind yourself to undo it at the end of the year so that throughout the year you can keep recreating the schedule. Or, yeah, like Laura said. Mm-hmm. I overrode somebody. Was that you, Christy?
I was going to say that we're kind of anticipating that next for 2021, there will still be some hesitation to submit data or the willingness to collect data. So we're kind of looking at the next 2 to 3 years as a lower than normal count years. And then by then our schedule will sort of start over again once things are normal-ish again. As long as FHWA is fine with sort of not meeting that target of the 3-year cycle.
Yeah, it sounds like they're certainly fine with it for 2020. Who knows about future years? Stephen is left, so. Yeah, I mean, we'll do what I agree with Laura. You can mess with the system that way for sure so that we don't have to make any permanent code changes. But if you guys think of it, and if there's something that you might want to see with regards to dealing with the scheduler for these years, let us know for sure. I want to say it's extremely awkward to sit here with the camera in your face and while waiting for people to talk. I'm just going to put that out there. You guys don't even know the travails.
Well, I actually had a question for Stephen, but since he left, I'll just ask the general room. How are people planning on calculating for future AADT? And also, there's a difference between, how people are using the roads today and where we're going to eventually settle out and what the engineers need to design roads for the future. So anyone have any thoughts on that? Because that's something we're looking at that in future, where I see us settling is we're back around 5% where we were, within 5% of where, 5 or 6% where we were last year right now. And so we're probably going to settle out at a lower rate like we expect, but that means that the growth that we may have projected for future AADT in this year's submittal based on 2019 is not going to be anything in relationship to what we put out next year. But I think we may end up underrepresenting what that growth is if we go down the, drop our AADT down by the whatever percentage that's larger than it really ends up the end of the year with. That's a little convoluted, but it basically comes down to how do we reconcile reporting versus engineering decision making. And how do we actually project out what the future AADTs are going to look like for reporting?
That's a good
Just
question.
spitballing here, but I think personally we would try to omit this year's ADTs from forecasting future ADTs. That's how we do it for our design team in Missouri, and I don't think you can properly use this year in relation to how a road is growing or shrinking to try to forecast what it's going to be 10 years from now.
And that's kind of what I've been recommending to our engineers is that even when we come around to 2020 next year, and we produce our 2020 numbers, that they're going to be better off looking at projection reports that we create with the 2018 data. However, we're still going to have a future AADT that falls within acceptable parameters when we submit to federal highways. So
I thought I had read something about them
Would they take
relaxing
no growth?
some of.
Will FHWA accept like a no growth for future ADT?
Margaret, I
in
think
the
is
past.
talking about future AADT as in the 20 year.
yeah, isn't the one you have to submit to federal highways as part of this? I mean, that's
that
different.
would be no growth. Yeah.
Those are gonna. We're not going to run projection reports with 2020 data. I can tell you that right now. We'll run them either off 2019 or 2021. But if we're looking at future AADT for the HPMS submittal, I mean, I guess just take the linear growth and apply it to the, except that I don't see that being realistically representative either. Because we're going to end up settling at a lower traffic volume or traffic rate overall, kind of like we did in 2008.
what we saw in 2008 after everything kind of settled back out was most roads returned to kind of the growth rate they had previously been at, except, you know, like if you graphed it all out, it took like a dramatic step down and then continued to grow at the same linear rate. So
Any other comments on that? Any other comments or questions in general about how we're going to deal with all these things in Jackalope? Okay, well, looks, yep.
This is Brian from Iowa. So how are you going to be in January if we have to kind of go back and redo all of our factor methodology for 2020, considering we've already computed rolling factors here through September?
Yeah, you guys have a problem, I think, because I think part of your rolling factor process, you're averaging 3 years, right? You use 3 years worth of data to create your rolling factor. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's
You have to
probably
go back
less-
and make some unplug everything.
Well, I don't know that you have to. I mean, I guess you could go through and recalculate. You know, that is a parameter that you set, how many years to go back. And you could change your parameter to be 1, just go back 1 year to find data, and recompute the factors and rerun phase 3 for each of those months, you know, starting in April or March or something. Otherwise, I think you are going to have a problem at the end of the year. I think things are going to be pretty wonky.
Yeah, we've kind of been talking about it. We haven't really finalized anything. We still have a meeting in the next month to talk about it. But yeah, it's like I was saying, we might have to go back to a 1-year factor just for this year. I didn't know how hard that was going to be to actually get it done.
From a Jackalope point, it's pretty trivial. From a business standpoint, of course, you've got all the work of going back and recomputing factors and et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, we could definitely help you set up the right parameters. So we'll just use a year's worth of data. And you
And
might
then
need,
maybe even next year too, keeping
Yeah.
only one, because then Brian, going to the 3-year method, you know, you'd have to get past year 2020 to be in that 3 years being used to eliminate this crazy year of data to be using for creating factors.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Yep.
Probably want to leave that function on for a while.
yeah.
The
I was
only,
going to cover that in our annual meeting coming up this afternoon, is just all the different settings and such, and that was going to be one of them that I was going to show. So
Yeah, that'd probably be good.
yep.
And
yeah.
I guess we should probably just make sure. I mean, if you and I, if you're confident, Catherine, that no one's got more than 1 year except for Iowa, then we're good. But, you know, that might be something just to check on your own and make sure you're not using more than 1 year in your factor workshop.
Yeah, so when I demonstrate later, anyone in the room should take note of where the setting is and just ensure that your state setting is what you expect it to be, which should be 1 year. Like I said, as far as my knowledge of all states, I didn't expect anyone else to be using averages in Jackalope to calculate your factors, other than Christy saying they did it outside of Jackalope prior to using 2019 creation.
Yeah, it's something I have to bring up in our meeting, maybe just switching back to 1 year as the standard that we do.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well, just have to worry about it come January 1st, or January 1st present.
But one of the advantages of doing it monthly like you guys do is you get to push all that annual work all throughout the year. So you lose that advantage if you wait till January.
Yeah, the short-term office doesn't get a jump start on analyzing their road segments and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I guess it's something we'll visit come January 2nd, I guess. All right, we'll talk to you before. Like I said, we'll have a meeting and try to hash out what to do. Get a plan before January.
Yeah, one idea I have is, maybe Joe, you can correct me if this would work or not, but like Brian, we could get an export from your system, put it into your JIA test, and then you could set it to a 1 year, and then you could run your factors for, just pick a month, April, using the 1 year method, and then you could compare what that looks like for your April 1 year to your April 3 year. And you guys would have a pretty good idea of what your skew is by averaging.
I mean, it's going to be pretty considerable, I would think.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I checked the hourly. Most of the other factors really didn't change too much. Seems traffic was somewhat consistent in its hourly flows and stuff. Just the seasonal is what really took the big hit.
Yeah.
And imagine that was being averaged with your 2 other prior regular years. If you took those smoothing years out, then you'd probably really be seeing a difference.
Yeah, I think our factors seasonal didn't look like they've added much growth to try to bring it up, as I would think when you had like 40% drop in traffic. The 2 years kind of kept it up a little bit.
Yeah.
I would imagine your axle factors would be off by a bit too, because we saw our commercial traffic stay pretty consistent in Missouri, where it was passenger traffic that seemed to fall off a cliff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what usually affects axle factors more than anything, is the passenger vehicles going wonky. So that's a really good point, Spencer.
Yep.
And depending on how many single tube counts you do, that could have a huge impact on your ADT.
I'm not sure. Our short term does a lot of class. They figure they're out there putting a hose down. They go ahead and put 2 down nowadays. But I can't speak for them on what percentage of class we actually collect.
Yeah.
For the short term.
Yep. Anything else to think about?
Nicholas was confirming and agreeing that the percent trucks is very screwy. He's using a very technical term for sure now.
Yeah, and that's another reason, to exclude 2020 for any future factor calculations. Axle factors are so influential. I mean, for those states that do a lot of single tube counts, in some states that's 90% of their count program is single tube counts. And if your axle factors are wrong, that's a big deal. All right.